Chapter 12. Tanks. As a young boy back in Vilsburg, I'd been in only one fist fight with a boy named Gus. Why we fought, I really can't remember. Before the fight, I had been filled with anger, then fear. During the fight, adrenaline had raced through my body, filling me with strength. When it was over, I was so drained I could hardly move. That is how I felt after the attack, only incredibly more so. I was rubbery-legged, shaky, and struggling to catch my breath. My ears rang, my jaw and head ached from being thrown out of the trench, and though I had not noticed it before, a bullet had grazed my lower left arm. My sleeve and hand were wet with blood. I wanted someone to bandage the wound, which had begun to throb. I wanted to clean up and perhaps get something to eat, then take a good long rest. The battle was over and we'd won. Certainly no more would be expected of me. These were the thoughts that were passing through my mind when I suddenly realized the fight was not over. It had only begun. "Now they will be hitting us hard," said Doberman. I wonder what he was talking about. "Check your ammunition." I felt in my bullet pouch. Only a few cartridges remained. As others were doing, I grabbed bullets from an ammunition box and refilled my cartridge belt. I was reloading the Mauser when I became aware of a distant squealing. Off in the black, undulating field ahead, tanks loomed into view, seeming to rise up out of the bowels of the earth. "Mein Gott in Himmel," mumbled Oscar. "Dear God in heaven." A sudden quiet settled over our lines. All that could be heard was the horrid squeal of the tanks. Russian infantrymen jogged behind, many in half-crouch. "A full frontal assault," whispered a veteran, his voice full of terror. I looked from him to Oscar. His scared eyes met mine. "Hold your fire," Doberman ordered, an edge of fear to his voice, a Panzerfaust in hand. "Wait till they're in range." German heavy artillery, far behind us on the hill, began firing and continued non-stop. Our light artillery and mortars joined in. Red explosions flowered everywhere amidst the tanks and infantry. Adding to the incredible blathering of noise, the Russians were answering back with their own long-range ordnance. The shells seeming to come from nowhere, from miles away. Tank cannons flashed at us. The ground vibrated with detonations. Part of our trench collapsed. I fell. I heard screams. I saw a boot with a foot in it. I was looking up into red, black-rimmed eyes as Oscar pulled me back to my feet. He was saying something, but I didn't know what. A chorus of defiant, fearsome yells was coming from the Russian infantry. Thousands of men, it seemed. They were running. And the tanks? I was horrified at how fast they were coming. Sheer terror made my whole body feel cement hard. It was difficult to move, even to breathe. I heard a cry. I looked over my shoulder. A tourniquet was around Fastnacht's leg. He was looking at the boot with his foot in it and crying in pain and cursing as someone dragged him away by the arms. The tanks grew closer, ugly green with a red star. "Feuern!" Doberman yelled. Like a shooting gallery, from all along our lines came crackling pops from rifles, and then the staccato rattle of the machine guns. Green tanks, brown uniforms. I aimed at the men, firing as fast as I could. Just shooting, not knowing if I was hitting any of them. Most kept coming. I felt like I was firing blanks. "I can't stop them!" I screamed. A moment later, I found myself heaving grenades. I was amidst a group, all of us doing the same. We kept tossing grenades as fast as we could, as far as we could, like kids throwing rocks. A tank cannon was turning in our direction. I stood frozen, awaiting its blast. Instead, coming from behind me, a sizzling hiss passed my ear. The tank lifted up on its treads and made a gong-like noise. It ruptured from within, blew apart like a tin box. I looked at Doberman, a smoking Panzerfaust on his shoulder. Bullets peppered all around me. Out of a chaos of smoke and erupting soil, more tanks emerged. Pitching and bucking crazily, they bore down on us, ripping through wire entanglements and rolling over the bodies of their own dead and wounded. One tank was knocked off course by a mortar round, But then it was moving again, directly at us and wobbling. Another spilled its tread and came limping to a stop. It began to burn. A crewman, his clothes in flames, ran out of the wreckage and right into the path of another tank. I saw men thrown into the air. A broken, life-size rag doll of a body landed on the turret of a tank. It was as if it had been dropped from heaven. With the body still on its turret, the tank's twin machine guns hammered at us. All along our lines, men dropped. "My God!" screamed Oscar. "Mein Gott!" Off to my right, I glimpsed a tank speed past, through our lines, and right over the trench there. "Oscar, no!" He had thrown his rifle down and was fleeing, as were others. Oscar, like a skinny horse just on its rear legs, was galloping awkwardly away. He and another man were punched in the back at the same time and sent sprawling by the tank's machine guns. Oscar struggled to his feet, only to go down again, battered by another spray of bullets. "Fix bayonets!" someone yelled. My bayonet dangled in its scabbard from my belt. There was no time to attempt to slide it into the lock on the barrel of my rifle. Russian soldiers were already leaping into the trench, and all about me was a frenzy of hand-to-hand combat. I fired my rifle point blank into the shirt of a soldier. At the same moment, I felt something jab my arm from behind. Squealing in pain and abject horror, using my rifle as a club, I slammed it down on the helmet of a Russian. "No!" he cried in Russian. "Niet Pazolchka!" I was looking at his face. I couldn't shoot him. I turned and ran. A slippery smear of flesh and gore in the trench sent me flying. I landed in a heap. Rising to my knees, someone slammed into me, knocking me sideways onto the corpses and debris. I saw Germans running. I struggled to my feet. Something speared my right knee. I screamed in agony. I fell against the back wall of the trench. I stared in frozen horror. A mammoth tank, dragging great long strands of barbed wire with it, churned out from clouds of smoke and dust. It rose up on the sandbagged front edge of the trench, one of its huge iron treads clawing at the air, the other broken, unrolling. For a moment it stood suspended above me. I dove for the ground, screaming, as the thing's massive underbelly came down at me.